Well, hello. I just want to say welcome to everyone. We are so excited to have you here for today's webinar. My name is Addison, and I'll be going over our agenda as well as helping you. We'll begin with our host patients introducing our guest speakers. After the presentation, there will be time for questions and answers, which will be moderated by our host. After the Q&A portion has concluded, I will share a few announcements related to the Zehr Institute and the Center for Justice and Peace Building, and then the webinar will be closed out with remarks provided by patients. We hope you are all able to stay until the end, but if you can't, there will be a recording of this webinar posted on the Zehr Institute's website and YouTube channel by early next week if you'd like to watch it again or share it with others. Just a brief disclaimer. We do have a secure platform, but in case of disruption, do not attempt to exit. Instead, close your laptop or turn off your device immediately. If this happens, we will resume the webinar again after 10 minutes. For today's webinar, for our Q&A portion, viewers can send questions through the comments. Our host will be facilitating the Q&A portion after the presentation. If you're having a technical issue, please feel free to send a message to me, Addison, using the chat. Again, please use the chat to send questions during the Q&A portion of the presentation. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the webinar. Now I'm going to pass to patients to introduce our presenter.
Thank you so much, Addison. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us during this third webinar of the spring semester of the Zehr Institute for Restorative Justice. Our guests today are Howard Zehr and Barbara Toews. Howard is the Distinguished Professor of Restorative Justice at Eastern Mennonite University's Center for Justice and Peace Building. He is the author of the best-selling Little Book of Restorative Justice, Doing Life, and co-author with Barb Toews of Still Doing Life. Barb Toews is Associate Professor of Criminal Justice at the University of Washington, Tacoma. She's the author of the Little Book of Restorative Justice for People in Prison, the co-author with Howard of Critical Issues of Restorative Justice, and the co-author with Howard also of Still Doing Life, which we will be talking about today. Barb is also the editor of all the editor of all the little books of restorative justice. So join me in welcoming Barb and Howard. Hi, Barb and Howard. How are you doing?
Good.
Good.
Wonderful. It's excellent to be here with you. Let's begin by you talking about what the process was of collaborating in bringing this book together. Can you begin by doing that, or even just talking about how would you like to open this?
I probably ought to start. Good afternoon, everybody watching here. I probably ought to start by just giving some of the history of the project, and then we can talk about how Barb begins to enter the picture. In the early 90s, I had done a book called Doing Life, where I interviewed and photographed actually more than 75 men and women in Pennsylvania who are serving life sentences. Not quite all of them appeared in the book. And I'd gotten the idea from the book because a lifer friend of mine who was in Alabama, who I'd known for years, had said, he said, Howard, serving a life sentence is like trying to keep a candle lit in a dark tunnel. And it got me wondering, what metaphors, how do people understand facing this? And what have they learned serving a life sentence, having been involved in taking a life? So I did this book. It was started out as an exhibit, and then this book. That came out in 96. And I always wanted to go back, but it really wasn't possible. And then a friend, Lance Couturier, was rehired as head of psychological services for the Department of Corrections in Pennsylvania. And he loved this book, and he really thought I needed to go back. And he arranged, helped arrange for me to go back. And so I was able to go back to 22 of these people, men and women. It was wonderful to reconnect with them, and to do portraits and interviews again. And this time it was a little bit more around how they were adjusting, how they had coped with this 25 years later, and what they were learning from life and about the meaning of life. So I got all of these together, and I had no idea what I was going to do with them. And then I began to talk to Barb, and I have collaborated with Barb on a number of projects over the years. And I said, Barb, this isn't going to happen unless you take a leadership on it. And she did. So I'll let her talk a little bit about what that's involved.
Yeah. So, when Howard asks you to do something, you do it, right? You don't second guess it. You just jump right on in. And I certainly was really excited at the opportunity to collaborate. So Howard had already by that point done the portraits and the interviews. And so when he brought me on, it was about getting things ready and actually in book format. So editing the interviews, re-looking at the 1996 interviews, which are also included in this book, most of them in full, some of them just excerpt if they were a little bit long. And then editing down the 2017 interviews and really trying to have kind of an interplay between these two different years. And then we also wanted to have something to kind of tie together the themes of the book. And so we kind of landed on looking at ideas of trauma and restorative justice as it relates to life sentences. And so we have a closing essay there at the back of the book, which I took the lead on writing. But it really worked out well with Howard, having the artistry and the work to do the photography and the interviews, and then me bringing in kind of that logistical support and writing and helping to pull the manuscript together. It really worked well.
But there's another reason. It's not just because she's a good collaborator. Barb knows many of the people. She worked in Pennsylvania. You can say more about that. But so she's really connected to a lot of these folks.
Yeah. So my whole career has been in restorative justice since I finished undergrad. And I went to CJP back in the 90s, graduated in 2000. And from that point, I started working in the area of prisons and incarcerated people and doing restorative justice work. So I was working for the Pennsylvania Prison Society in Philadelphia at that time, which I'll mention is the oldest nonprofit in the United States. And they, in that work, got to know a lot of the lifers in select Pennsylvania prisons because they were the ones who were really providing leadership in the prison. And so they were the ones that knew about restorative justice, many of them already. And that was partly from some previous work with Howard and some colleagues of his who were doing some restorative justice work. And so they were some of the ones that were in doing life and are now in still doing life were my main contacts for doing restorative justice work in Pennsylvania. So I had the personal interest in being involved too, because I had known some of these men and women over the course of these 25 years and, wanted to support this project and be involved in this project as part of my relationship with them and my deep love for them as colleagues in the field and as fellow human beings, wanted to help bring this project to fruition.
And what were the goals of the project for you?
Well, for me, it was, first of all, I wanted to humanize people. In my other books that we maybe talk about later, like Transcending Victims of Severe Crime, those kind of books, my goal has been to humanize people for a couple of reasons. One of them because respect for people is a basic restorative justice value. But I wanted us to have so often our discussions about criminal justice policy are in terms of stereotypes and generalizations. I wanted us to meet real people. And so part of my goal was just to present people without the stereotypic clues. A lot of prison photography shows bars and all of that, which immediately begins to make us think in terms of stereotypes. So I got permission. I just set up a little studio and photographed people the way I wanted to be photographed. So my goal was really to help people listen to what lifers have to say without all those barriers.
Yeah. How about for you, Barb?
Same reasons that Howard just talked about. but also to really get people thinking about some of these extreme sentences like life without the possibility of parole, and using that humanity and that connection they can get through the book, through the photographs, but also through the words, to actually get people to think about whether this sentence is actually really one that's doing what we want it to do.
Yeah.
And, we've been very clear with the book. It's not about advocating or taking a particular position on the issue, even though Howard and I certainly have our positions on it, but really wanting to get people to at least think about it, roll it over, consider the tensions, and consider their perspectives on it.
Yeah.
Do you have a copy of the cover handy that you could put up, patients, or something to give people an idea what these photos look like? Or maybe when we get to the next.
Sure. Of the photos.
Well, I just thought you had the cover of the book. If not,
oh, okay.
I'm on a different computer than I.
Okay, there we go. All
there
right.
you go.
I got on my camera.
Yeah,
There we go.
That helps. Yes, indeed.
I've got the blur on. I realize I hold it up and it can't find a face. So.
That's good. So is it okay if I show a little clip of a video that you all created for Yvonne Cloud right about now, and then we can talk about it afterward?
Yeah, Barb, why don't you say something about who's reading this and so forth?
Yeah, we took several of the people that were in the book, took their interviews, and had asked Cameron Holmes to read the interview, the 2017 interview, and record himself reading it. And Cameron himself is a formerly incarcerated man in Pennsylvania, and he did that. So at several points here in the webinar, you will see the portrait of one of the people in the book with Cameron's voice in the background reading his 2017 interview.
Okay. All right.
Way that will benefit me as well as others in the. I'm more outspoken and mature now. I found my voice and am able to express myself. I'm coping in a better and more positive way that will benefit me as well as others in the community. Back then, when I was first interviewed, I was somewhat shy, still in denial. Didn't want to talk that much or let anybody know I had a life sentence. I still have the same determination to do positive things and give back to other people and change their lives for the better. I took a life, now I try to save lives. Even though I'm here, I can still make a difference and guide other people in the right direction. Peachy was definitely an influence on me. She met me at a time when I was in my 20s, acting like a little kid, running around and doing the wrong things. I had all this potential, and Peachy brought that out of me. It was a sad day when she passed away on Palm Sunday. It was like the whole campus stopped because she inspired so many people. I spent years and years facilitating groups, everything I could grab, inspired by Peachy. I worked 10 years in the drug and alcohol therapeutic community. I recently became a certified peer specialist. I go all over campus helping the young offenders, letting them know that even though they're here, they still can make good choices and not repeat their mistakes. I go door to door in the mental health unit, inspiring and motivating people, letting them know that there is hope. They can change. People have done it. I also work in admissions, so I talk to women as they come to the prison, letting them know about all the positive this institution has to offer. People come here and make things so much harder for themselves than it has to be. They come here with 2 to 4 years and end up doing the whole 4 years when they don't have to. It's all in the way we think. If you think positive, 9 times out of 10, you're going to do positive things. If you think negative, your behavior is going to reflect that. In 1993, I came close to getting my degree before they snatched away the Pell Grants. I had training for the hospice program. I worked in Project Impact for 5 years. I received the Lisa Wagner Award in 2004 for all the good things I've done as far as school. I received the Inmate of the Year Award in 2006. I've been doing a lot of positive things for a long time. Even though I don't know what the future holds, I'm determined to stay on the straight and narrow and continue to help other people. Pay it forward. Teach others what somebody taught me. That's what I do mostly, even on weekends. These activities make me feel good about myself, knowing that I'm helping change other people's lives. I'm very busy, but I make sure to get my rest. It's mandatory, or I wouldn't be able to do any of this. Most of the older lifers are mentors. You have some lifers, sad to say, who are still bitter, angry about their situation, like there's no hope. Then you have the ones like me who just want to make the best of our situation and help others along the way. People ask me, "Oh my God, how do you ever do so much time?" I say, well, I have no choice in the matter. All I can do is the best I possibly can. Take one day at a time, sometimes 1 second at a time, and keep my head up high and be as strong as I can and give back to other people. I always remind my family that I'm strong and tell them all the things I do every day. I don't want them worrying about me. Some people go by what they see on TV. They don't know. They never been here. So it's our job to let them know that we're okay. I try my best to keep them strong and let them know that I'm taking good care of myself. Thank God my son has never been in trouble. Doing life is in the library. It reached all over the campus. A lot of people really appreciate that, and a lot of them didn't know about life sentences. Some inmates walk by us every day and don't have a clue unless they sit down and talk to us. The book brought up a lot of people's awareness about life sentences and how we cope with it from day to day. It has taken me many years to forgive myself for the wrongs I've done. I didn't have any right to take the life of another human being, and I have deep remorse for doing so. If I could turn back the hands of time and make a difference, different choice, I would. But I can't. Today I'm still suffering the consequences for my actions on that fateful day 37 and a half years ago.
So would you all mind reflecting on what the themes that struck you between the 2 years, 25 years ago and now?
Well, I'll start out here, I guess. By the way, Peachy is Sharon Wiggins, and she was a lifer who was very much respected inside and was a mentor to many of the women there. And she died a number of years ago, and that's what Yvonne Cloud was talking about, was the loss of this really important person in their lives. Well,
Howard, can I just say that we dedicated Still Doing Life to Peachy because of the impact she had on so many women's lives.
So there's a picture of her in the front of the book if you're interested. Well, the first interviews, as I said, the first book had been more around how they understood life sentences. The second one was more around what they'd learned over these years and how they were coping. And one of the themes that really stands out, and I wasn't surprised by this, is that how many of them are trying to do good. And they're doing it so their life will have meaning, and they're doing it as a sense of payback. I don't think I ever asked in either projects anybody about the person they had victimized, and yet so many talked about it. And many of these talked about the debt they owe to society and to the families and so forth. So that was one really clear theme. Barb?
You know, I was taking the first and second level of STAR, the CJP trauma training and work we do while we were working on this project. And as I was editing interviews, had this aha moment that, oh my gosh, they are talking about this whole trauma healing process, acknowledging what they've done, connecting their own experiences to the crimes that they committed, the trauma of incarceration, the giving back as a way of trying to repair harm, and thinking about the harm that they caused. And I was like, wow, it was like a light bulb going off. And so that really is the theme that's really struck with me. Life sentences as trauma, incarceration as trauma, but also this amazing human potential to heal, even when you're faced with the worst of conditions in which to do that, rising above it and healing and transforming.
Yeah.
And it should be said that life in Pennsylvania is life without parole. So the only way to get out is a commutation by the governor, which is very rare, and a complicated process. Or some people have gotten out because of a recent Supreme Court decision about the inadmissibility of automatic life without parole for people who are sentenced as juveniles. We can talk more about that later, but I just want to make sure that you understand life in Pennsylvania is life.
Yeah, can we talk a bit about that now? Like, why is that? Why is it without parole at all in Pennsylvania?
Who knows? But what a lot of people didn't understand that, at least for many years, I'm not sure if it's still the case, first and second degree were automatic life without parole. And a lot of defense attorneys didn't know that. A lot of the lifers told me they were told they would be up for parole in 7 years. Some of them accepted plea agreements on the basis that they thought they would be able to apply for parole. So yeah, it was a serious problem for many people.
Are they more aware now? Is that something that people are more aware of, so that when they're making plea agreements, that they know what exactly they're agreeing to?
Barb may know, I don't.
I don't know. I think we would have to ask people. I know that some people who've gotten released have been working really hard with people on the outside to raise awareness of the issue and make people know that. And help people think through their plea agreements.
Mm-hmm.
But whether we can say that people are more aware, I don't know.
It's just, So,
I was just going to say, I'd also add, and some of the men and women in the book talk about this, that life without the possibility of parole has become very much a political issue as well. So depending on who the governor is at any particular time, who they appoint to the board, can really make an impact on whether someone has any hope of getting a recommendation or a hearing or anything like that. So there is concern, and hopefully, can start breaking down at least some of that kind of thing, those kinds of things that are happening where it's been so tied to the politics.
Yeah. I mean, so obviously having life without parole and on the possibility only being that a commutation comes means that the only way you leave this sort of sentence is either by being commuted or by dying. And there are two who have gone through that process. Do you mind talking a bit about them? And I'm going to bring up their images here.
Take the next one. This is
What's that?
Barb, go ahead. This is
perfect. Yeah, this is Freddy Knoll. He was released a couple of years ago. He was sentenced as a juvenile. So because of the recent Supreme Court rulings, he could have a sentencing review and thus was commuted to life with the possibility of parole, and then was paroled shortly thereafter. And one of the exciting things about him is that we were able to interview him at home. So we had a Zoom interview with him to talk about what's that transition like, how does he reflect back on a life sentence, and his wife popped on for that call as well. And so he actually has 3 interviews in the book, because we include the 2021 one, and there's a lovely photo of him and his wife at a restaurant to kind of close out his interview as well as close out the book. Brian Wallace is another gentleman in the book who was also released for the same Supreme Court decision. So he is also out. We've had email communication with him, but have not spoken with him directly. So that's very exciting.
Mm-hmm. And what are the circumstances surrounding the 2 who have passed on?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Howard.
Well, Joseph Miller. I don't know if his picture's next or not. Keep going here and see. Well, here's one. Barb, why don't you say something about it?
Sure. This is Bruce Norris. He was lucky enough to get a unanimous recommendation from the commutation board, which meant that his file made it to the governor's desk and was just waiting for the governor to sign the paperwork for him to be commuted. And unfortunately, he contracted COVID and died in January of 2021 while in prison. So while he was waiting to be released, in the sense of waiting for the governor to sign his papers, he unfortunately died while incarcerated. So we never actually got to be out, even though he got as far as the governor's desk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow.
And
Have we talked about this gentleman?
no, we'll wait to see if we have time for that. Keep going. Let's see if we can find Joe Miller.
Okay.
Next try. There we go.
There he is.
Joe Miller died of cancer. He had been an alcoholic, and that what caused the reason ultimately for his being in here. He is an artist. He had really, his meaning had found in prison was as an artist. He had decided not to apply for commutation. He was just going to live his life out there, and his family convinced him to start the process, and then he died of cancer.
Okay. Howard, you had two books that you had before this that preceded this one, Transcending and What Will Happen to Me. Can you talk a little bit about that, because they give a different perspective, a complementary one?
After I had done the Doing Life, I really wanted to do the same for people who are victims of crime. And I wanted to, again, challenge stereotypes people have about victims. I also wanted restorative justice workers and criminal justice professionals to better understand what victims go through. My experience in working with prosecutors and others, they're in contact with victims every day, and they really have no understanding of what victims are going through. I also wanted a book that maybe the general public who wouldn't necessarily pick up a book on crime victimization would be sucked into it and read. And I was hoping it would be a book that would be helpful to people who've been victimized, who are going through these experiences, to hear that their experiences were not unusual, and to maybe get clues from other people about how to deal with it. So I did around 40 interviews and portraits, same style. This was in the US and Canada, with people who had been through severe crime. They had lost family members to murder. They were child abuse victims, and just all kinds of different experiences. And that book came out in a book called Transcending. Just this week, or in the last 2 weeks, Barb and I have done a webinar for a victim organization attached to the Department of Corrections about both of these books, to try to humanize both sides of this. Then the other book, done with Lorraine Stutz and Amstutz, was a book about the millions of children whose parents are in prison and the trauma they're going through and what they're coping with. Similar kind of style, portraits and interviews. Part of our audience there was caregivers, like grandparents, but also teachers and social workers who had these kids in their classes and didn't really understand what these kids were going through, why they're behaving the way they did. So that was the other book you mentioned, What Will Happen to Me.
Mm-hmm. Barb, you've mentioned that you use a lot of, you've previously used these books in teaching. Can you talk a little bit about how you've utilized them in the classroom?
Yeah, it's in the classroom, but then also public speaking and various different kinds of jobs that I've held since 1996.
Yeah.
One of the beauties of Transcending, Doing Life, and now Still Doing Life is the portraits. And when I'm going to talk anything about survivors of violence or people who committed violence, I'm always bringing those portraits along. I've actually cut up a copy of each of Doing Life and Transcending and laminated the portraits and made sure they had nice clean backs so I could tape quote excerpts on the back and that sort of thing, and have done a number of activities where people just interact with the portraits before they even know who they are. And I've done it sometimes where I have photos from Transcending mixed in with photos from Doing Life, and people don't know who's who. Since in Doing Life, the men and women could wear civilian clothes in those portraits, you don't know who you're looking at. And it's really been amazing at breaking down stereotypes that people have, both about survivors, but also about people in prison, because when they find out that they have just told me that, and whoever's in their group with them, how lovely this person looks, and they're so kind, and there's someone you want to sit down and have a coffee with, and then they find out it's someone who's killed somebody else, it kind of blows their mind. Yeah. And so really some powerful things can happen when you do that. And then to actually read and interact with the interviews can make a big difference. And I want to give a shout out to my students here at UW Tacoma. I taught adult corrections in the fall. Or no, I'm sorry, that was just this quarter we finished that we're in exam week for. Whoa, time's flying. My students in my adult corrections class worked with galley copies of the book to draw out quotes that are going to be used in an exhibit that the publisher is putting together for the book, and also have created the basis for a discussion guide coming from it. So I just want to give a shout out to my awesome adult corrections students for being engaged with the book in that way as well.
Yeah.
I've heard
Yeah, go ahead,
I've
Howard.
heard from a number of people in various prisons that they are using the Transcending book to help them become more aware of victims. And I've also heard from juvenile, particularly youth incarceration centers, that they use both of the books, but Doing Life, to help young people think about the implications of their actions. So that's always fun to hear as well.
Yeah. I was reminded, Barb, when you were talking about showing the portraits, especially the ones 25 years ago where people have their civilian clothes. Because to me, immediately what jumped out with the more current ones 25 years later is that it is evident to me immediately that these are incarcerated people.
Mm-hmm.
What happened? What happened in that time, Howard?
In the early years, they were allowed to have a set of street clothes in their cells and to wear them on special occasions. That's no longer true. So it was really special dispensation that I got in at all. This would not have happened without Lance and some other connections we have. But they just didn't have the option of street clothes. So we had to go with the uniforms that they had to wear.
Why is that? Is that like a change in law that just doesn't allow them
It's just
to?
tightening up. I mean, over the years, things have gotten tighter and tighter, more restrictive, partly been more politicized. A variety of things have happened, but it's just gotten access has gotten a lot more restrictive than it was.
Yeah. I wonder if both of you could reflect individually about if anything surprised you the most about doing this project between the 2 years. What was surprising to you that you didn't expect to encounter?
There weren't a lot of surprises. They were reinforcements of themes. I was surprised that many of them were doing as well as they were. They have really found ways to not just cope, but to build lives in there, and it's pretty significant. So, I mean, I was not surprised by that, but I was impressed by it. Barb, do you have anything?
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you put it that way, because I think for me, I think back on the last 25 years of my life and how much has changed in my life. And, when I read the 2 sets of interviews, it feels like so much has stayed the same for them. But yet at the same time, like, still so impressed with the hope that they have and the resilience, again, in this really terrible environment. And just really the maturity, in working with the men and women that I did when I was at the Pennsylvania Prison Society, and then again with this book, even though I've done a lot of growing over the last 25 years, I still kind of feel like they have their act together way more than I do in some respects. And it's very humbling, let's say.
It should be said that there are a few people who committed suicide between the time of those 2 books. John Yacht, who's pictured. I mean, it's interesting. I have a Polaroid from John Yacht that I did. Just give you a little background. When I'd done the first round of photographs and interviews, I hadn't published a book, but a national magazine had picked up and published some of the photographs and quotes. And I heard from one prison, a group of guys wrote to me and they said, we like what you did here, but you didn't go deep enough. Because I had been expecting to do an exhibit and I hadn't done very long interviews. And they said, we really want to know what's happened to these people, how they've changed and so forth. So I met with about 20 guys and we talked, and I said, this was pre-digital. I said, okay, here's what we can do. Many of you have a photograph of when you first came into prison, probably a Polaroid. If you'll bring that, I'll interview you, and I'll do a Polaroid picture of you now, and we'll lay them side by side, and then we'll talk about who you were then and who you were now. And those gave the longer interviews that were provided an appropriate rhythm for a book, Doing Life. And this picture of John Yount was a Polaroid, and somehow it appeared out of my stuff recently, and so I have it lying here to remember John. But John committed suicide. He just couldn't cope. I had seen him a few years before this happened, and he was really discouraged. And he had said, "I just don't know if I can keep going." And sure enough, he couldn't.
Yeah. We have a couple of questions beginning to roll in here. Jack asks, knowing all these lifers, what is your thinking about sentencing people to life sentences?
Do you want to take it, Barb, or do you want me?
Sure. I have a problem with sentencing people to life sentences. You know, I have the benefit of knowing some of the men and women in the book and Still Doing Life, and then ones from Doing Life, the original book. And they're amazing people. They are people who've made, caused significant harm to other people. And my relationships with them have indicated that that is a harm that they're prepared to face and address. They have amazing skills. They have done so much reflection in prison. And I really think that, and also for me, being someone who's heavily involved in the restorative justice philosophy and that work, I really believe that incarceration, and especially life sentences, and especially life without the possibility of parole, isn't providing meaningful accountability. It punishes, it enacts revenge, but it leaves some serious gaps in actually doing justice for people and repairing harm to the degree that they can. So I would really love it to see if we can do some other ways of holding people accountable that aren't about this particular sentence. And, you know, while I have that perspective, I just want to reiterate with the book, we aren't forcing that perspective on people. We want them to think about life without the possibility of parole and maybe do some shifting on what they're thinking. But we've been really trying to balance that in the book.
The worrisome thing about life without parole is that when death penalty abolition, in abolishing a death penalty, it's easy to see life without parole as a more acceptable alternative. And what happens is the juries find that much easier, or courts, to impose without really realizing what's happening. So it's worrisome when life without parole becomes part of a strategy to end the death penalty.
And as some of you may know, life without the possibility for parole is sometimes called death by incarceration. So it can be experienced as just another form of the death penalty that has just become more palatable than the actual execution.
That's for sure. Lori Knight asks here, Howard, do you have any plans for following up with the people whom you worked with in Transcending?
Oh, in Transcending. Well, I've thought about it. It's not quite as logical a project as Doing Life. And I'm older and I'm not sure I'm up to it, but I have, in fact, I've talked to the Office of Victim Advocate in Pennsylvania a little bit about that, but I don't have specific plans, but I'd love to do something. I thought maybe you're also asking about follow-up with these folks. We do have, as Barb mentioned, there's an exhibit going to be opening in Philadelphia, and then a traveling exhibit. And Barb has been back in touch with everybody that's going to be in the exhibit. I don't know if you want to say something about that, Barb.
Sure. Just about the exhibit generally?
Well, and just about the contacts you've had with them around that.
Yeah, so the publisher, the New Press, they got funding from Art for Justice, which is a national art and social justice philanthropic organization, and they are creating a traveling exhibit and then also a gallery exhibit that we're going to kick off in Philadelphia in spring sometime. I'll leave it at that, really general. And we'll include the traveling exhibit will be about half the people in the book, and then the gallery exhibit are going to be, at this point, everybody who's in the book. And, have let people know in the book that this is going to be happening. And certainly Freddy Knoll and Brian Wallace will very much be honored guests at these event openings as people who are already out. And, I'm just waiting on letters coming back from those who are still doing life about their involvement in those exhibits. And we're really looking forward to that as a way to, just another way to engage people in the work of the book and the voices and the portraits of these individuals. And we have plans to have the exhibit up in 2 prominent Philadelphia locations. And also I should say that in all of our efforts that we've been doing, we've reached out to the survivor communities so that we're going about any book launch as well as these exhibits in a way that is taking their needs into account, and so that the exhibit doesn't re-victimize them.
Yeah.
So that's also been an exciting thing that we've been working on with this project.
Okay. As we go through some of these questions, I'm just going to put up some of the other portraits and just go through them as you answer them. But before we do that, let me, here's a question by Angela, and they ask, do you have any plans to expand this project to other states?
It'd be fun to do.
And
Getting access is not the easiest thing. It varies from state to state, obviously. But that's a big issue. I used to make myself available. Actually, I have been asked in the past. I've been in Angola years ago in Angola prison in Louisiana. I was photographed on death. I did portraits on death row many years ago. And I could maybe do that kind of thing again someday. I don't know.
I would love to put that question kind of back on the person who posted it, and wondering if the book can inspire any of your local photography organizations or oral history projects or any of those types of organizations who might be interested in doing one very specific to your location.
All right. And here we have another question. Could you touch on reentry circles being utilized for those that do end up getting out?
What a great question.
I don't know if those are being used in Pennsylvania. I know there are states, there are organizations like Lauren Walker's in Hawaii that are doing reentry circles. I don't know if they've ever been used here or not. Do you?
Not that I've ever heard, and so few people get commuted, that I know support is really important, and when they get out, but support I think can also make a difference when people are going through the commutation process. So and a lot of people that I know, well, I should say the sample size is really small, but people that I know that have applied and gotten at least to a public hearing, they have a lot of people behind them who are writing letters of recommendation. And these would be people from inside the prison, organizations on the outside, potential employers, family, just huge circles that are behind them to help them be successful when they get out. But the idea of reentry circles or circles of accountability and support really is a great idea for people when they're being released.
Yeah. Do you, for example, while you're, making people aware of this book, do you encounter pushback and people who would rather that you concentrate more on the victim side of it, sort of like transcending? Do you encounter any kind of And how do you hold that?
Barb, can you take it? I've lost for some reason I've lost the website here, so I'm not seeing it. I have to keep looking for this thing.
Yeah, sure. So we, realized early on, particularly with the once we started doing the exhibit, that we needed to be engaged with the victim community to make sure that we understood what they needed for this to be coming out. And to understand if there would be pushback, what the nature of that pushback would be, so that we could appropriately address it. And so the Office of the Victim Advocate, who we did an event for last week, they actually contacted the survivors of the men and women who are in Still Doing Life, so that they got the heads up that the book was coming out. And so, there was mixed reactions to it, of course, and we understand why there would be mixed reactions to it. And, our very intentional choice to get in touch with some key leaders of the victim community in Philadelphia is to also get a sense of if there's going to be pushback, what the nature of that would be, and how, again, we can address it. Because it's, Howard and I both come from restorative justice backgrounds, and, we're aware of, the very questions of restorative justice: who's been hurt, what are their needs? We're wanting to know how could this project hurt someone, and then what are their needs in response to that, and being preemptive in that so that we minimize that. I mean, it is difficult to see someone who has murdered your loved one on the cover of a book or in a book. And so we definitely want to be sensitive with that. We have gotten the question via the Office of the Victim Advocate whether people got paid to be in the book, which they did not. What the Art for Justice grant for the exhibits did provide an honorarium for them, and that is something we're working with the Department of Corrections to get them. And that was kind of like a thank you for letting us use your image and your words beyond the original intention of the book. Even though they in their consent to be in the book, there was also on that document that this might lead into other ways. But we definitely have to be doing that. And I think the nice thing is that Howard has a track record with transcending, of doing victims and offenders in his work.
Right.
My own work being victim offender dialogue, and at the same time that I was working for the Pennsylvania Prison Society, I was serving as a trainer for the Office of the Victim Advocate for their dialogue program, and had developed really great working relationships with victims, even though my work was in the position of working with people who are in prison.
I am curious about the children in What Will Happen to Me. Yeah, do those show up do those stories come up, like when you're doing this book promotion? Like, yeah, can you reflect about the children who obviously by now would be adults and how they engage with this?
Unfortunately, I don't know the answer. And by the way, I've lost visual completely. I assume I'm still here, but
You're here.
Okay, that's good. I'm looking at a blank screen. I have not. I worked with particularly with a woman in Arkansas who, Deanne Newell, who was really in contact with organizations around the country, but I haven't heard from her recently. She keeps track of some of those young people, but I don't have any current information on that, unfortunately.
Okay. If you all have questions out there as you are watching, please submit them. And we'll submit them to Barb and Howard. Yeah, we have some comments here from Barb Fisher, who says that they do reentry circles in Pennsylvania for those that are aware of sources, and should ask where it's a formal program that is funded in Pennsylvania. And Barb is one of our alums, right? Was she one of your students, Howard?
Who did it?
Barbie.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm glad to know that. I remember that now that they were doing some. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Anyway, is there? Let's see. Should we show the little video about Bruce Norris? Would this be a good time? Would you like to introduce it in any way, or should I just go ahead and show it?
I can say just a couple words. You'll be hearing next from Bruce Norris. He's the one that I mentioned earlier had died from COVID while his commutation application was sitting on the governor's desk.
It's a lot of wasted time. I've been incarcerated for 42 years. It's a lot of wasted time. I've become a grandfather and a great-grandfather. It was hard enough watching my children grow up, and now I'm watching my grandchildren become young adults. It's a little tough to deal with, but I always reflect back on the person I killed, what their family's going through, or that his children now have grandchildren and great-grandchildren. At least I get to interact with my grandchildren and my children. I'm thankful for that. What keeps me going is that I've educated myself. I got my Bachelor of Arts degree from Villanova. I was in the dental lab for 9 years. I got involved in different programs, restorative justice and alternatives to violence and groups like that. I read a lot more now since I graduated from college, and I feel as though I can be an asset to young people coming in here. I have hope. I've always had a great spirit, even before I came to prison. The way I keep it up is that I mind my business, educate myself. I want to be a better person now than when I first arrived. I talk to young people a lot. I try to help them, give some of my education back to them. Things like that keep me going. I'm self-motivated, and I take pleasure where I can find it. I've always been a smiler ever since I was a kid. It's part of my DNA. I do have down times. I lost my mom several years back, and it's still a soft spot for me. But I have to go on and do this time. I told myself when I first was incarcerated, your main focus is to survive. And I do that every day. I take that from my reading about the slave period. The older people said, don't go out there starting problems, because the one thing we don't need if we are to survive is to cause problems and have everybody killed or harmed. If we survive, we can reach greater heights. That's my motivation. I like reading things by and about African Americans. I just finished reading the 2 Barack Obama books, Dreams from My Father and The Audacity of Hope. I've learned that no matter where you are, what you do, who you are, or who you think you are, you always have to give back. You have to reach down, reach back, and help others. And you can't do it for something in return. It's little things like writing or reading a letter for somebody, or sharing books with people who might appreciate them. I give my time to young people because I wouldn't want my children to come into this institution and not have somebody who's older that they could look up to and be friends with. I tell them about my process and what I've been through, and they sit there listening. They don't cut me off. They allow me to speak. I always felt I should have been a counselor. I have a lot to say to them about how they should conduct themselves and what they should be getting involved in. I've always believed in the philosophy, each one teach one. I'm proud and satisfied where I am right here, other than the fact that I don't know if I'll ever get out. I think I've done everything that's humanly possible to show that I deserve a second chance. I hope others will think so too.
Cindy asks, how old was Bruce at the time of offense?
I just looked it up and he was 24. He uses language of he was 24 when he came into the system. So I don't know what that means about when he committed the offense, but he was young 20s.
All right. We have a question here by Jack. Another question by Jack, which he asks, what is it about the U.S. criminal justice system that makes it so much based on retribution rather than restoration? And he says, I'm thinking about how nations like Nicaragua have a 20-year maximum rather than life?
Well, it's said that we have the most politicized justice system in the Western world. And that's partly because of the election of prosecutors and that kind of thing. So there's the whole cultural punitiveness. I mean, we're a very punitive culture, but the politicization of the process has got to be a key part of this. It's just, and politicians and the media have used this in such a way that it's really up the ante a lot. So I'd say that's part of the answer. And Barb, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, what I would add is, incarceration is horribly retributive, and it's kind of one of our main go-tos when we want to do retribution. And we can look back, we can link our problem of mass incarceration right now all the way back to slavery, if not beyond, with racism, white supremacy, and how the criminal justice system has evolved into being the system with which we keep racial divide in the country. And so that's a historical context and evolution that we also need to be thinking about. And then it raises the question of how can we address that historic harm in such a way that it's going to change how we do justice.
Okay. Cindy asks, did any of the people in the latest book meet the families of their victims, and what were the outcomes?
Well, the first picture you put up, Craig Datesman did meet the family. He says it's the most important. Let's see, do you have the quote there handy?
I do have it handy. Should I read it?
Yeah, why don't you read some of it?
Okay. Craig says, and you can put Craig's picture up while I read. That would be awesome.
That's the first one in that PowerPoint series.
There he is.
Okay.
Yep. The meeting with the victim's family, telling her what actually happened, was the best thing in my whole incarceration. She told me what the loss meant to her and was understanding of what it's done to me and how I've changed and grown. It's rewarding to know that even after 35 years, they aren't hating you, being vindictive, or wishing you were dead. They're on my visitors list, send letters and cards, and have written letters for my commutation. I did a TEDx talk about it in Graterford, which was the prison where he was incarcerated. The reconciliation program was really rewarding. It's funny how the fruits of something you did 10 years ago come back so much later, just kept growing.
Yeah. So he's still serving his time?
He is.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Is there anything else, Barb and Howard, that we haven't covered here that you would like to talk about? And if people have other questions, please submit them as Barb and Howard reflect on what we may not have covered so far.
I can't think of anything. You have anything, Barb? It's just really an honor to be able to do this, to be able to be trusted with these stories and photographs. I'm just so appreciative of people letting me do that. And I've tried to do it in a way that's respectful and to everybody involved. It's just really meaningful for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the publisher is just amazing. It's so exciting to have a publisher who is really excited about this topic and is really excited about using portraits and interviews as a way to communicate on a really serious and deep criminal justice issue. So that's just been such an affirming part of the process, that this is a book that needs to get out there and that it really can play an important role in people's conversation. Datesman. Craig's last name is Datesman.
Yeah. What did I say? Anyway,
Oh,
the publisher's so excited. Barbara, the book was released yesterday, and both of us just got cupcakes as a celebration from the publisher. How about that?
Yeah, it was just a normal old work day until the cupcakes arrive, and I'm like, oh. the book release date is something to celebrate.
When was the official release date? Was that yesterday?
Yesterday. Yeah.
All right. So people can find it wherever they buy their books, online or in bookstores.
And there'll be there's a series of webinars resulting in this. So we'll be doing these kinds of things, probably with a little different focus on each one through this month and next month for sure, and probably more when that exhibit opens in Philadelphia.
All right. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, we're just going to sort of wind this down and hand this back over to our graduate assistant, Addison Tucker, who we're going to bring back in, and she's going to help close us out. Hi, Addison. Back.
Hi. I just wanted to say thank you to you both for sharing your powerful work with us. I know that I was glad that I got to be here. Before we close, I've got a few announcements to share. First, please visit the Zehr Institute webinar page for our spring webinar lineup. We do have one coming up April 20th. The Strategies for Trauma Awareness and Resilience, otherwise known as STAR program, is designed for individuals and organizations whose work brings them into contact with populations dealing with current or historic trauma. While the global community continues to face turmoil and uncertainty, trauma and resilience education is as vital as ever. We are pleased to announce that STAR 1 and STAR 2 are now online. Registration is available to join upcoming online training. A Level 1 and Level 2 course will be available through the Summer Peacebuilding Institute starting May 26th. Visit emu.edu/CJP/STAR to get more information and register for upcoming sessions. After 2 years of online only, there will once again be in-person courses for the 2022 Summer Peacebuilding Institute. For a list of in-person as well as online courses, more information about scholarships to the Summer Peacebuilding Institute, changes related to COVID, and the metrics we will use if we feel we have to go online, go to emu.edu/SPI. If you're interested in learning more about restorative justice, we have several opportunities for you to study at Eastern Mennonite University through graduate degrees and certificates, such as the Restorative Justice Graduate Certificate, which is perfect for working professionals. EMU also offers studies that combine RJ and education, or RJE. Students pursuing a master's in education can get a restorative justice and education concentration. Or similar to the previous slide, graduate certificates are also available for those interested in restorative justice in education. There are also master's degrees in conflict transformation, restorative justice, and the newly added program for transformational leadership. The curriculum is practice-based and ideal for individuals looking to be reflective practitioners within their chosen field. For more information, visit emu.edu/CJP/grad. Last but not least, the Zehr Institute website is available as a source for upcoming events, resources, the schedule of upcoming webinars, and a place where you can find past webinars that are linked to YouTube. The recording for today's webinar will be available early next week. That concludes my announcements, so here is Patience with a few closing comments.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Barb Taves and Howard Zehr. This has been wonderful. And from the comments that are coming in, a lot of other people have appreciated them, have appreciated this hour. And hopefully everyone goes buys these books and holds every story delicately within their hearts and everything. So thank you for your time and all the best going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.